Welcome. Hi, beautiful souls. My name is Sadhana. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my weekly Thursday night tarot chat. It's really nice to have you here. Tonight, I have been inspired by another tarot tuber, Katie Powers, to go through some of the concerns, questions, and unpopular opinions of many people. And it's been really, really interesting. I've never done a video like this. And I went through Katie's community tab, as well as all of the comments that followed her video, unpopular opinions on tarot and also on TarotTube in general. And it was just fascinating. So I've pulled out several themes and tried to group the comments together so that we could discuss it, so we could have a little chat about it tonight. And I thought it'd be fun to do it live because I really love to go back and forth with you. So welcome. Hi, Kyle. Nice to have you here. So I thought just before I dive right in, I would share with you a gift that I received. This piece of spirit quartz. This is my very first spirit quartz, and it is citrine and amethyst, it looks like to me. I was just really touched when I received this because the person that gifted it to me, we've spent a lot of time together over the last few months, and it was just really, really touching. So welcome. Hi, Brenda. Hi, Corvin, Till, Raven Tarot, and Tinker Mouse. Yeah, it's really, really special. And so I pulled out Judy Hall's, I found it in Crystal Bible too. And there was a lot of really beautiful things. And I didn't know that it was one of the crystals to work with when you're working with clients with crossing over. So that was of interest to me. So yeah. So thank you very much to the person who gifted it to me. So let's get right into this because there are so many things, many topics, and I'm hoping I can get through the bulk of them. Katie had 100, as of yesterday, she had 138 comments on her community tab and 217 comments on her underneath the video. So it's obviously a very, very popular topic. So I'm going to start light and then go heavy because I thought that would just be a good way to do it. Actually, I've kind of mixed it up. So the first one is too heavy on the counseling or spirituality when it comes to reading the tarot. Too many readers focus on the highly spiritual, metaphysical aspects of tarot. That has its place. I just have to open my document wider. But we live in the here and now. Also, too many people focus on the esoteric symbolism in certain decks. You don't need that to be a good reader. The question you ask and the spread you use designed to answer is more important. So I feel that's kind of a two-parter. So the two-parter is, the first one is I want to talk a little bit about actually there's three parts here. One is the counseling. And for sure, and I'm only going to speak for myself. I am not trained as a counselor. What I am trained in is yogic psychology. And so I've spent a lot of years in working with various yoga teachers. And we have dived deep into the yogic methodology of healing and of wellness. And so when I go into the counselor hat, for me, that is really connected to things that I have studied and things that I know well. And I feel comfortable. I would never dive into anything that I didn't have experience with. So I hope that readers who are out there on YouTube who are counseling are trained as counselors, because that's pretty scary if they're not. Spirituality. So too heavy on the spirituality. I don't know. There's two camps, right? So there is the very, there's the type of readers that read very Lenormand style. So very matter-of-factly, you read with the facings, what you get here. It's very direct and highly relatable. And I've used this expression before. It sounds like you're getting a reading from, from your grandmother or somebody's grandmother. And I love those kind of readings. And I think for me, sometimes that slaps me right in the face, because a mouse is a mouse, quite literally. And a book is a book, or it's a contract about a book publishing. And sometimes I get carried away with the spirituality and I forget. And thank goodness I have the opportunity to do face-to-face readings with people, because often a client will say, well, what does that mean? And they'll point to the card. And then I have the opportunity to reply, well, what does that mean to you? And this happened one time where a client had just been offered a contract to, it was very, I won't go into all the details, but what they saw on the cards was 100% confirmation that yes, they should go ahead and accept this contract. And that's not where I was going at all. So I think that it really depends on the situation, and it depends on the question. And sometimes spirituality is the way to go, and sometimes it's not. It depends on the comfort level of the person that you're talking to, and also meeting the person across the table, on the other side of Zoom, where they're at. And I think the gifted reader is going to be able to pick up on where they are at. So these are all, I think, really important aspects. Kyle says, I'm a licensed counselor, but I don't consider tarot readings an automatic counseling session. Yeah. Hi, Ange. So that was one part of that. And then this person also said about the symbolism. So too heavy on the symbolism. Well, I have to disagree. I have to disagree, because sometimes, like I said, a mouse is a mouse. And if I told this story, I was walking home with my daughter, a mouse ran across our path. We never see mice in this neighborhood because there's so many darn cats here. And then I came home, I did a reading for my daughter, and what was on the card, in the center of the reading, loud and clear, was a mouse. And so that symbol of that mouse, I went and got my Stephen Farmer book. I wanted to look up the energy of the mouse. We talked about what the mouse represents, on many, many levels. And so I disagree. Sometimes the symbolism is so important. So how do you not read? So if we're going more esoteric, old school type symbolism, I feel the same way too. I think sometimes you will be drawn, for example, to the Ankh in the Emperor. And all of a sudden you'll go, what the heck is an Ankh? What does that really mean? And you'll start to research about what that symbol is. And then all of a sudden you'll start seeing that symbol in other aspects and other places in your life. So I disagree. I think there's a lot going on at many, many layers. I'm just reading Angie's comment. The medicine cards are good too, to find the meaning in animals. Yes. It's really nice when you have guidebook writers that really know what they're talking about, and they dive into that kind of medicine. And then on a similar vein, it is just ink and paper. Yes, it can be fortune telling. I love fortune telling. And I don't do counseling. I'm not trained to do counseling. I'm a fortune teller. If you want a counselor, please seek a professional with appropriate degrees and a license. So I don't think it's black and white. Fortune teller, counselor. I think that we all have our unique style and our unique way of delivering readings. And I think as I've evolved as a reader, have become more comfortable with divination and been able to see and to recognize symbols, numerology in association with particular months or days or dates or things. If a client specifically asks when, and you pull a card and you have the emperor with the, or you have the high priestess with the two pillars, and then you have the chariot with the two pillars, and then you have another card that has two pillars. Well, if they've asked about a timing, I mean, you can certainly suggest November. It seems pretty clear that the tarot is trying to, relate and connect to the querent. So I don't know. And certain decks do a really, really good job. I talked recently about working with the Victorian Fairy Tarot this spring, and I just found that deck opened up whole new doors to talking about timings in tarot. So I think it's just a matter of what you're comfortable with and your level of experience and having the right kind of deck and practicing, right? Reading is a practice. We need to do it frequently and often, and to build confidence and experience with different decks, different people, different kinds of questions, different, and in different pressure situations too, right? It's a whole new can of worms when you do it for somebody else and you have to speak in full sentences and answer questions and go back and forth and weave a story. So yeah. Tinker Mouse, KS, hello and welcome. Tinker Mouse says, I'd love to find a video that discusses some of the best guidebooks. Okay, so that is a really good question. I did touch on some of my favorite guidebooks in a previous, not too many Thursdays ago. And I know Simon just did one. And I definitely will do a VR to that. He did the top, was it top 5 or top 10 companion books? So yes, so you can go back and look at my previous video and his, but I'm definitely going to do a VR to that because I have a few that he didn't mention. All right, I'm going to go on to this one. I don't like gilding huge cards or thick card stock. Just let me check the comments. Oh, Essence is here. Welcome. And Kyle says, I think counseling comes into play as you try to develop rapport with the client, but then it's up to them. Yeah. And so that's why one-off readings can be really difficult. It's really nice when you can follow through with somebody, or at least have a second reading to when you build that level of trust with the person, because I think that's really, really important. Hi, Jamie. So this next one is, I don't like gilding huge cards or thick card stock. So I have to agree on a couple of these, and others I completely disagree. So when we talk about gilding, does gilding and edging mean the same thing? That's my thing. Or does gilding only refer to silver and gold, or only gold? Because I have a few decks that I absolutely love, and I'm so happy they came edged. Here's one of them. This is an oracle deck. This is Personal Power by Deja Osborne. So, and it has worn really well. It hasn't come off. And one of the reasons I love it when deck creators have their decks edged is that I don't have to do it. And it just creates there's the back of the cards. It just creates a really beautiful feature for the cards. So that's one of them. And I know that with gilding, sometimes the gold does chip off. This is my numinous, and you can see that it's starting to wear. And I wonder if in this particular deck, if the gilding actually suits the energy of the cards. To me, this deck would have been energetically suited to a more matte cardstock without gilding. So I get that. I don't know, like this, it feels a little too shiny for that. So I partly understand. This might hurt. I mean, the edging is absolutely beautiful. Is this gilding? Does this mean gild? I'm not sure if that person meant edging and gilding. And this is not worn for me, but it's not entirely necessary. So I'm kind of on the fence with the edging, that's for sure. But if you saw a recent video of mine, I went, ooh, and I got so excited when I broke open this deck. And this is Ember and Aura. And I was actually, one of the reasons I was attracted to the deck was from the edging. So I have to disagree on that one. Huge cards. Generally, I agree. Generally, I agree for sure. Michelle is here. Hi. Corbin says, I like gilding, but I prefer the matte gold gilding. Some thick cardstock is too hard to shuffle. So yeah, so before I go to the huge cards, I think with cardstock, there is thick cardstock can be really hard to shuffle. You can't riffle shuffle. I love riffle shuffling it. But there's also something else. And I'm not a paper person. I really don't know the lingo of all the, I understand what the GSM means and all of that. Textured Tarot is a deck that I really like. I really love working with that deck. And even though I haven't riffle shuffled it, I have damaged many of the cards. And I don't think it's because it's thick. I think it's a quality. It's a paper quality. It's very cardboardy. And so, yeah, so my deck is quite damaged. And I would love to talk to a paper person about this, because eventually one day I may create a deck, and I will definitely look to a paper quality more like this might hurt, definitely, than the thicker cardstock. Yes, Ember and Aura is one of my favorites, Jamie says. I don't consider that as gilding. For me, gilding is definitely the gold shiny stuff, which isn't my favorite, but it's a deal breaker. I love edging generally. Oh, there was a first edition with no pink edges. And you have no border, so that's pretty nice. Baba Studios do make good quality decks. Yeah, and paper quality is a whole different thing. So I think there's two issues with paper. One is the GSM and one is the quality of the paper. So it really, really varies, and it totally befuddles me. And one of the things this person didn't mention was the finish, because sometimes I feel that the finish is overkill. And we all love, you know, cards that, so for example, this deck, when I shuffle it, you know that sound the cards make, that slip, that nice slidey sound, and the cards never stuck together when I unpack them. It's just really that beautiful quality of finish where the cards move. And then if you go on the far opposite side of that, that beautiful, beautiful oracle deck called Roots and Wings drives me crazy, because I can't overhand shuffle it because it sticks together so much because of that, whatever that finish is on it. So I want a finish on a deck that allows me to shuffle it easily. That's definitely really, really important. So yeah, linen card sounds. All right, so extra large cards. So a lot of people hate really big cards, and here's one deck. I don't have very many. This is the, what's this called? The Enchanted Tarot. And this, I would have to say, is my largest deck. And I would never trim this deck because I feel like the artwork is so detailed. There's so many details in the artwork that if I were to trim it, it would, I don't know, I feel like it would lose a quality. Even if I trimmed 3 sides, I actually like this deck exactly as it is. And I have trimmed many, many large decks. I trimmed Poppy Palin's deck, the Everyday Enchantment Tarot. What other large ones? Oh, the Gaian Tarot. I actually gave mine away and bought the Llewellyn version. Yeah, I don't have too many, but definitely I get it. For small hands, it's really, really, it can really be an issue. Essence says, I'm not a cardstock snob per se, but I really don't like sticky cards. But I do tolerate it for 2 decks I love, Mary L. and Tarot of the She. And I don't like cardboard texture. Yeah. Yes, like light sears. You should have gotten the glossy Roots and Wings. It's awesome. Okay, I didn't know there was an option. Live and learn, right? So sometimes we have to make these mistakes, and that's why all these unboxing videos are kind of important, so that you can, you know, listen, so you can get opinions from other people. And trimming. So let's talk about trimming. I know some people just freak out because they think you've ruined a deck when you trim it. So how do you weigh in on trimming and not trimming? And I want to read you this one comment. Trimming is all well and good for those who like a craft project. Sounds like Don Michelle at Boho Tarot, but should not be necessary to make decks usable. If a person doesn't have the manual dexterity to shuffle phone-sized cards, they probably don't have the manual dexterity to trim them all evenly. Neither should they have to. It's an accessibility issue. So I get that, right? We shouldn't have to adjust a deck to make it usable. And I trimmed my Tarot of the She because I didn't like the shape. So I trimmed off the 2 sides to make it more tarot shaped. But yeah, I totally understand that. I wanted to show you 2 decks here. One is a borders thing and one is a trimming thing. And I think I've shown this in a video side by side. See if I can, actually, I'll just hold up single cards because I can't hold up the whole deck. This is Llewellyn, trimmed and untrimmed. And initially I trimmed it because the artwork is so beautiful. It's quite close to the Rider-Waite system, and I found it quite easy to read. And also the whole thing about the artwork popping and those kind of comments are totally valid. And I love the little tiny cards. I love the little tiny cards. It's totally more manageable to shuffle. It feels really sweet in my hands. I edged it in this kind of, I forget what the color is, antique paper or something. But then I went back to revisit the deck and I started reading the guidebook, and in the majors, there is a title on the top and on the bottom, and the name of the Welsh legend is up on the top. And I have become fascinated with these legends and these stories, and I wanted the name on the card. And so that's why I repurchased the deck. And now I prefer the one with the borders because of the content of the borders. So that might be a totally different issue. So let's just go to the comments. Jamie mods most, but not all. Yes, and I think for a lot of people, it's about the process. It's about that connection with the deck. So that's really, can be really, really important. Kyle has grew up on glossy decks, so they'll always be her favorite. Corbin totally agrees. It's fun to mod decks, but we shouldn't have to in order to use them. Yeah. So I'm glad you guys are chiming in on this. And I am, if I miss your comments, I will go back and definitely read this later. And if there's any comments you want me to see for sure or repeat for sure, make sure that you either write it in caps or you do at Integrative Healing with Sadhana. So I'm going to go on to the next one, because this is kind of an interesting topic. Reading without a question is my style. So here's the unpopular opinion, and that is to not have a question, just to do a general reading. And so how do you feel about that? Is it okay just to do a general reading? Can the cards do a decent job with a general reading? Or is the whole idea with a tarot reading is that the querent asks a question or you ask a question? My personal unpopular practice is that I read questions without a client needing to tell me the question. It's not my fault that the cards do this with me. They just do. Often I am still none the wiser about what the question is, but my client is completely satisfied with the reading and it made sense. I am happy to be able to read for people while being able to offer them the choice to maintain their privacy. What the cards do for me is not a judgment upon what the cards do for another reader. I'm not trying to show off or be better than anyone. I'm not trying to do cheap tricks. We all have different styles, and it goes on. So yeah, so that is something that I am pretty much on the fence about. For the most part, I think it's really helpful to have a question, especially if I'm doing quick readings. So when, like tomorrow, I'm going on at noon and I'm going to do quick 3-card readings. And if you don't ask a question, it's really hard, in 4 or 5 minutes to dial it down. It's so much easier if there's a question. If somebody says, I just want a general reading, I do it, but it's really not enough time, I don't think, to hit the mark. So let's see what some of you have to say about that. Where are we at? So Corbin is a general reading, or Corbin Tail Raven Tarot says, yeah, that's pretty much what I do for myself every morning. So does that mean a general reading? Jamie says, I think you can do what you want, but I think you get a deeper read if there is something asked. Okay. Yes, and there's a whole bunch of questions about spreads and so forth. Essence says, I've gotten a general reading and everything hit the nail on the head. I don't judge anyone's approach or style. What works for you works for you. So that is, yes, okay. General reading every morning without a question. So this is definitely a personal thing. And I think it is, so if you are a new reader and somebody is asking a direct question, for me, I find that easier if you have 5 minutes. If you have much more time, then the question isn't necessarily as important. What I don't like is if a querent sits down and starts telling me their life story. It's like, okay, and then here we go. I'm not the counselor. I'm here to help you navigate through something. What's your question? Why are you here? And so that's my job, to bring them back to their focus. So yeah, so that kind of ties those two things together. The next one is kind of a huge can of worms. And I know that I have chimed on this many, many times, and it has to do with diversity in decks and diversity in general within the tarot. And I have a few things I'd like to say about this. So the first one is that I have a collection of decks because I have a huge variety of people that I read for. I've read for 11-year-old children. I've read for 90-year-old men. I've read for gay men, straight men, gay women, straight women, divorced women, fat women, skinny women, women in between, women of all sizes, men of all sizes. I've read for plumbers. I've read for lawyers. I've read for all kinds of people. I've read for people who are new to tarot. I've read for professional tarot readers. And sometimes there's a certain comfort level, and to create that connection, especially with a new client, if you can have on your table a few different decks, and you have a deck that feels like the conversation can flow more easily and support the conversation and the reading and help with whatever it is that person is trying to navigate through, then I think it's important to have a selection of decks. And if you don't, and then you're comfortable reading with a Tarot de Marseille or a Rider-Waite or a Thoth deck and stick to an old standard, then the symbols, I believe, and the metaphor and all of that symbologies that is connected to a much higher, it's connected to the super consciousness, really, is going to come through and shine. So it's really up to you. And if you're going to stick with old school, I think you need to be really gifted in your symbology. But we don't have to do that anymore. We have such a variety of decks out there. And so you can have a selection of decks that are representative and include a lot of different people that you read for. So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing is that if you're going to call a deck diverse, then it needs to be diverse. So I think having a deck that is designed for a certain demographic isn't diverse. It's just a deck for that demographic, right? So that's what I was saying earlier, is I have a selection of decks for different demographics. What I don't think we need to do is to be so harsh on deck creators because they didn't include one particular demographic in their deck. I don't think it's possible to do justice to everyone who wants to be seen and recognized in a deck of cards. I love the Sasarai Bito. I love those older people in the deck because I'm older. And maybe a younger person doesn't really like that. And I want to just touch on body size and body shape. And also I'm going to talk about masculinity and femininity as well, too. This is a kind of a, let me know what you think of this story. So I was absolutely blown away. I was at a dinner party with a bunch of women. This was many, many years ago. I was with a group of women that I didn't know really well. And they were talking about being excluded and being treated very, very poorly because they were beautiful. They were model-like, actually. They were quite, to me, it was quite intimidating. But at the same time, I do my best, right, to be open and welcoming. And I think sometimes we forget that no matter what people look like, that they are a soul. They're a soul being. And I've seen so many beautiful memes on Facebook that remind us we never know what a person's pain is, right? We never know. And I have, there's a few decks out there that look a lot like Barbie dolls. And maybe I should never say that again, because maybe the person who is very, very thin and very, very pretty, like those women at that dinner party, are tired of feeling crappy for being thin and what our culture considers beautiful. So those are some of the things that have really come up for me. I just wanted, the comments are kind of rolling here. I love a deck that has all colors, genders, and sizes. Jamie has a large collection. So yeah, so you can select an appropriate one. Kyle says, we need to define diverse. Yeah. Corvin, this is real. This is a real story. It's a real story about people who actually express that. So So yeah, anyway, I'm not going to belabor the point, but I wanted to read you some of the comments that kind of stuck out for me. And I know Kyle chimed in on this on the on Katie's comments. There was one here that was really good, and this has to also do with cultural appropriation. So I know we're often looking for decks that represent various cultures. I will come out and say it. Artists, deck creators who create culturally specific decks about cultures they are not a part of are cultural vultures and appropriators. I see shamanic, Egyptian, African decks created by white people who might have read up or studied and think that studying qualifies them to create a deck based on it and capitalize on the experience of others. I do not buy decks that are not part of the culture to which I belong, because that will only continue the appropriation and the erasure of people whose experience, culture, practice it is. Yeah, and this kind of goes on and on about that. So I guess that's a whole other situation. I'm just going to go back to here. There is no shortage of images of beautiful, thin people. This is true. I believe you. I just think they need to check their privilege. Yeah. So it's real. It's real for everybody. And for me, it's just a reminder that honestly, we don't know anybody's pain and what and why, somebody may be really, really thin for some very, very sad reasons. So I'm going to leave it at that. Essence says, no matter how diverse a deck is, it doesn't mean that everyone will feel represented. Of course, you're right. So that's why one deck is definitely not going to cover all. And then my opinion on the cultural appropriation. So I would not create a deck unless I felt. I would also draw in lots of resources. So I'm hoping these people who have created very culturally specific decks who do not belong to that particular cultural group have done their research and done their legwork. Let's look at the mystical shaman, for example, the mystical shaman oracle. So Colette Baron Reed's name is on that. Beautiful artist, Jenna Della Grataglia. Alberto Villoldo has worked extensively with shamanism. He has some roots in the South American culture. So the kind of shamanism that I was trained in has connections from South America all the way up through North America. And so I understand how, and I've met with lots of different people who've been working with shamans from that line of Peru all the way up through Canada. And there's a deep connection and a deep root between all of that. So I'm not sure, again, that it's so very, very black and white. What if a creator is an academic and has researched a culture extensively and then creates a deck with the knowledge they've gained? Exactly. So I think it is really important to know your stuff. And then this also leans into, can you create a tarot deck if you've only been reading tarot for 2 years or 3 years? Can you write a tarot book if you've only been playing with the tarot for 2 or 3 years? How much experience do you have to have with tarot to create a tarot deck? And that's a little further down the list, but it's kind of the same thing, right? So do you do your research when you're purchasing a new deck to find out exactly how much experience this deck creator has with the tarot, or are you just looking at the pretty pictures? That's a really good point. No amount of being an academic can make you understand lived experience. Yes, and we need to be so very conscious of sacred practices from different cultures. And what I was saying was that the group of white people, primarily white people, that I trained with go to live and be with the indigenous people in the Andes, and have gone back many, many times and share their journeys and their practices. And also the people from those communities in the Andes have come to Canada to share their stories and their culture and their practices, and to bless and to consecrate certain pieces of land and to meet our community. And so I feel that the shamanic community in which I travel feels like they have integrity. And of course, that's going to vary, and that's entirely up to you to judge. Okay. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Some of these things are just have gone too far in one direction. So this is a really interesting one. So kind of on the same topic, and that is that, and I would really like for you to, if you know of any decks, put them into the chat. And that is decks that, so there's so many decks out there that are heavy on the feminine energy, the goddess energy. Can you start listing decks that feature balanced variety of men, not necessarily men, but masculine energy? So there was many comments. Here's one, I'll read it to you. I do wish there were more men-only decks that didn't feel the need to be body beautiful or manly tough guy decks. So is there a deck out there that exists that features that balanced masculine energy? I would like to know. There was talk of the Hoodoo Tarot being appropriated. Okay. I will go back and read all of these. I want to go on. Druidcraft is pretty masculine. The Fountain Tarot, obviously RWS Thoth, so many. So I think this question and this concern is arising in reaction to all of the, like the one I just showed you with the pink edges, is definitely, just going to switch screens here, is definitely like a feminine deck. I'm about to do a side-by-side of, oh my God, now I've got it, the Muse Tarot with Textured Tarot. I have some things I want to say about these two decks. And the Muse is all strong feminine energy. So is this imbalance out there? Do you feel that this is an imbalance? And if you are reading for a guy, straight, cis, whatever, old. So let me tell you how hard it was for me to choose a deck for I think he was around 90 years old, who walked into the reading room for a reading. And of course, I went old school because it was really difficult to choose a deck for him. What about if you have a guy who's, I don't know, 30, 40 years old, never had a tarot reading? What deck are you going to choose? Right? If you're using a deck that's not an old school deck. So I'm just looking. The new Pride Tarot is interesting for balance. Can I get an amen? Says, I use the RWS for any men. And I have found that Spirit Within reads really, really well for people that are either new to tarot or when I get a reading with a guy. So that's one deck that I really, really appreciate. All right, let's go on. Secondhand decks. I think there is a bit of a stigma with buying using secondhand decks. I almost always find when I buy secondhand decks, I get the best and most meaningful readings. Maybe it's been around the block and a bit wiser. To me, it feels like a gift from the last person. Okay, so that uh, is that an unpopular opinion? Secondhand decks. How do you weigh in on that? I'm just reading the age diverse. We're still on diversity. Okay. So yeah, so my opinion on secondhand decks. The only thing, and I have a few secondhand decks and I love them, and I am looking and scouring through thrift shops, secondhand stores, looking for some classic decks whenever I go anywhere and I have an opportunity to go to a charity store, a thrift store. I go in and that's the first thing I ask, do you have any tarot cards? Because I'm looking for something amazing that somebody else has, either doesn't know what it is because it's been passed on from somebody who's no longer in the family, or something that somebody's ready to share. And so yeah, so I am all for secondhand decks, and I have bought a few through Tarot Marketplace on Facebook. So I have no problem with secondhand decks. And when I receive a secondhand deck, it definitely goes outside. It goes in the sun. There's a cleansing process that I go through. Often secondhand decks, like secondhand books, have a funky smell to them if they're really old. But for the most part, I have no problem with buying secondhand decks. So Sue C says, I've never heard of secondhand decks being seen as a negative thing. Actually, the opposite. Jamie's are cleansed and charged. The prior person or people's energy is cleared away. So this particular issue comes from there. I believe that there are certain people that fear what energy clings to the secondhand object. And I think that's where this arises from. And so the whole idea about cleansing and the process of receiving a secondhand deck, I think is really, really important. And perhaps the people who wrote this, or how this conversation came up, maybe that was an issue. Okay, here's another one for you. Ready? This is actually a really good one. Tarot and the uninitiated. My unpopular opinion is that I don't think everyone should use tarot. I feel that there are certain spiritual initiations that one should go through before peeking beyond the veil. I think some understanding of certain metaphysical principles and ethics should be refined too. Tarot is really powerful to me, and I see it being used in a way that lacks understanding. If it's just being used for 3D purposes, I find that to be incredibly offensive. Tarot to me is soul level work, and we are accessing something that is a great honor to access. So overall, I just think the lack of respect and sanctity it's treated with sometimes bothers me. That is a big one. So, do you need to be certified, initiated? Do you need to be part of a coven? Do you need to have a spiritual advisor in order to do tarot readings? Should there be a standard in tarot? Right? So, and I'm assuming this person is talking about professional readings. So how do you feel about that? Oh, we've got some new people coming in. Ozark is here. Hi, Donna. Tar Apple, hello, welcome. So I don't know if you just heard that last bit I read. That last bit I read. What do you think about that? Tarot for the uninitiated. I personally disagree. I think that the tarot is a wonderful, wonderful tool for self-reflection and discovery. and that over time, anybody can develop a relationship with it. And I think that the more you read, the more you practice, and the more that you use your tarot deck, the more respect you will gain, and the more you will understand its multiple layers. Tar Apple disagrees as well too. So I found that very interesting, unpopular opinion. I do not want to, there's a few comments here that I'm not going to bring up because there's certain tarot decks that people don't like. So I don't really want to go there. Let's go to this next one here. Re-roll a reading. I liked this one. My unpopular opinion is that I feel like it's okay to re-roll a reading. Sometimes I pull cards and they just don't make any sense. And I try to read them, but I just cannot. So I pull cards and ask my question again. Sometimes I will even wait until the next day or use a different deck. I have found that if I do this, then I'm able to do the reading. I feel that most people would disagree with doing this, and that cards you get are the cards you get, and that this re-rolling feels very taboo. So yeah, I have a couple things I can share about this one. Donna is certified in tarot and oracle both. Do I need those pieces of paper? No way. For me, the process of taking those classes only added to my ever-growing knowledge of my practice. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. So this next one, yeah, re-rolling a reading. Re-rolling a reading. The cards you get are the cards you get. And if you can't read the cards you get, is it because you don't like what the cards say, or you honestly are drawing a blank because of what's in front of you? So I think this is a really good question, because I think that is an unpopular opinion. You don't re-roll a reading. Those are your cards and they have a message for you. And perhaps you just need to leave those cards on your table or your altar for hours, for a day, until you figure out what they mean. Tail Raven Tarot says, sometimes when my chronic pain is bad, my shuffling is bad, and it's a bad shuffle, causes cards to jump out. I'll put them back in and redraw the cards, but I can tell the difference. Each person has a different, oh, hello, Andrada Street. Different system of reading. I would personally pull a clarifying card and that's it. Yeah. And I totally agree with that, right? We can be shuffling cards, and we put one down. Oh, I don't like that. Let's draw another one. I don't like that. Let's draw another one. So I don't think this is so much, I don't like that. Let's draw another one. But I want to go back to what Corbin said. And that was that sometimes when it could be arthritis, it could be chronic pain. It could be that 10 minutes ago, you had an argument with someone, or you had some disappointing news. And what I believe is that whether it's the chronic physical pain in the body or the energy that is being reflected back from that argument that you had, it's kind of reflected in the cards. And so what I usually advise tarot students is it's like you don't drink and dial, right? You don't scream and card sling. You need to give a little bit of space between that. So if there has been something energetically of a low vibration, that is not an optimal time to shuffle and to sling cards. Yeah. And yes, Essence has a really good point. There's a moral responsibility when doing a reading that's bigger than just tarot. You don't scream for someone on a ledge to jump, but you don't lie and say everything will be perfect if they don't. And yes, that is so very, very true. And So I'm talking more about, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about more about myself and what's going on for me. So if I'm doing a professional reading and I'm being paid for the reading, or even if I'm doing complimentary readings on YouTube or something, I stick with the cards. And what I do, so here's my process. So if I don't like the cards that are on the table, I go back to the basics. And I go, okay, which way are they facing? Who's talking to whom? What are the symbols that are sticking out to me? Is there a recurring symbol in this card, and this card? And I talk it through, because there's a reason these cards are on the table for this person, whether the person is present or not. And I remember when I was doing the year ahead readings I did on YouTube, I got to a point where I think I was a little bit tired. And so I stopped. I believe I got to the star card. And so I'd done 17 readings, or I don't know, 12 readings or something. And then I thought, okay, this reading is shit. I can't read these. And so I thought, okay, I'll carry on tomorrow and I'll do the last ones the next day. And then I shuffled cards and I was doing the reading for the star card, for the year ahead card for the star. And again, it was the hardest reading. It was impossible. So I just went, okay, you got to do this. Go back to the basics, step by step. And then I was able to pull the message out of the cards. So I think re-rolling is okay if you realize that it's because of the pain in your back or your hands, or because you deflected some other energy from something else. But for the most part, I think there's a process in learning to read cards that are really, really difficult. So, this is kind of hard. This is exhausting. Tinker Mouse says, I think one can be respectful without having a lot of special teaching. Tarot reaches our intuition. Spirit doesn't just speak to the chosen few. Yeah. And everybody's saying Corvin must have said something great here. I don't think that there can be bad shuffling. I think some days I think our nervous system is a little bit fried, right? And if our nervous system is fried, shuffling can be really, really difficult. I think it's a reflection, right? It's part of our balance. It's part of our dexterity. So yeah, so I'm going to go on because I want to fit in. It's almost an hour and I want to fit in a couple more, because there's a couple of really juicy ones and I'm not going to get to them all. Okay, so here's one. Unpopular opinion that starting with RWS is not necessary. I have never been drawn to the RWS and always used non-traditional decks. I was actually like 5 or 6 decks into my collection before I knew what the RWS was. I had some incredibly powerful experiences despite that. Don't get me wrong, I respect the history and I think everyone who is drawn to the system should use it. I don't think that that's the only way. The human experience is vast and it can be encapsulated with many systems and approaches. So, thanks for being here. To start with the RWS, of course you don't have to start with the RWS. Do you have to start with the Thoth or the Marseille? No, you don't. But I believe that you need to find a deck that you can relate to so you can understand the system of the tarot. And the deck needs to be easy enough to read so that you can understand the system. I believe that you can read the cards intuitively, but there's some foundation that's necessary. And unfortunately, most of the tarot books refer back to the basic RWS, or to, if you're doing Thoth or Tarot de Marseille. So, but even so, right now I am shoulder deep in my study of Tarot de Marseille right now. And even within Tarot de Marseille, there are so many contradictions It's crazy. I had no idea. I am just enjoying this so much with the way that the swords face, or the way that the fives are pointing on the pip cards, and God forbid the emperor isn't facing the past. And I'm learning so many things. So even within the Tarot de Marseille, there's a lot of contraindications. And no, you do not have to start with the RWS. Ange says it's a good foundation to learn a system. Yeah. So how you learn your system is entirely up to you, but I think it's really important to understand that the RWS clones stray quite far away from RWS. And so that if you want a foundation, I think at some point you need to come back to the foundation of the Tarot de Marseille, or come back to the foundation of the RWS. Fancy dresses here. Hi. Is there an already prepared list with these? Can I suggest one? Of course you can suggest one. These are all unpopular opinions that came up on Katie Flowers' video that she did earlier this week, and on her community tab. So we're at an hour. So I'm going to do one more. If there's anything pressing, unpopular opinion that any of you have, go ahead and type it in caps in the chat and I will respond to it. Otherwise, I will scroll down here to my long list of unpopular opinions, and I will pick one to end with. So, and it's kind of going full circle because we started with guidebooks at the start. Okay, that's a really good point, Donna. If we all read the same way and learn the same way, there would be no little need for so many tarot readers and decks. We're all different, and it's what we should be. Yes, we are all different. And I love you all. I love people's quirks, and I love the funny things that happen on people's videos and readings. And so sometimes I watch Richard at Tarot Oracle do his readings, or sometimes I watch Tiger's Abyss with his readings. They read so differently than me. It's crazy. And I think, like, where in the world are you picking this up from? And I don't know. I'm fascinated with how people read. And it's really good practice if you are a reader to watch other people read. You can learn so much. And also to give yourself an appreciation for exactly what Ozark Oracle, what Donna just said. Okay. Did I say the last one? Oh yes, guidebooks. Okay, so this is the last one, and then I will sign off for tonight. So this is hilarious. I love this comment. This has to do with poorly edited guidebooks, and generally poor guidebooks, and no bibliography in guidebooks. And I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I don't really appreciate a guidebook that is a rehashment of somebody else's stuff. So an artist has created a beautiful, beautiful tarot deck, and then I go into the guidebook and it doesn't say anything about the artwork. It doesn't say anything about why the artist chose what they did. It's just this rehashing of all somebody else's words of the tarot, probably the RWS system. And what that tells me is that the artist doesn't have either the competence to share their symbolism, or I think this is another one that is really important, that the guidebook comes second. And that if it has been a Kickstarter project, there just hasn't been time, or the deck creator didn't have enough people on their team to create a sufficient guidebook. because a guidebook takes forever to write. I just was going through the PDF for a deck that I backed on Kickstarter, the new one by Robin Cole. She's done a fantastic job, and I'm just really enjoying reading it. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to write a decent guidebook. And so, yeah, like, don't bother writing a guidebook if you're just rehashing other people's stuff. And if you don't include a bibliography, you're not crediting all those resources that you used. So you need to have a bibliography in the back. Not only does it show respect, but it's just plain old theft if you don't have a bibliography. You need to reference your sources. As well, it's really nice to have a list of books that guidebook creator, guidebook writer used, so that you can, if you're a reader, you can reference those sources. So what do you guys think about this guidebook thing? I'm just going to go back up here. I think that it goes with your personality. Just a second here. Index. Yes, please put in an index. I was doing a reading today, and I had out the, what's it called? The Pythia Botanica. Pythia Botanica, the guidebook is all mishmash, right? There's no numbers on the cards. It's all out of order. It's not an alphabetical order. And so I've put my own system inside the book, but I realized my little piece of paper fell out, and I wanted to read what the creator had written. Couldn't find it. So yeah, index. Please put an index in. And please have an original thought. Yes, Jamie, that is so important. Okay, so yeah, I ignore guidebooks unless I hear they are awesome. I also agree. Multiple dodgy practices are no time to put into doing it properly. Okay, so yeah, so why I was saying, as an English professor, yes, I definitely support having a bibliography. It's just really important on so many levels. And if you don't, you don't have to, I don't know. Footnotes are nice, but you don't have to put in footnotes. But please don't plagiarize somebody else's book, right? You have no business writing a guidebook if it's complete plagiarism. And thank God in the tarot world that we have so many amazing guidebook writers. And yeah, so the reason I said this is full circle is I will do a VR to Simon on my top 5 guidebooks. Maybe I'll do top 10 guidebooks, because there's a few that I really, really recommend, and I would love to share that with you. Guidebooks or companion books. I think he included it as companion books. So for example, the huge Patrick Valenza coffee table book that goes with his tarot deck, the Deviant Moon Tarot, is absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing, but way too expensive, of course, if you don't have the funds for that. So yeah, so I will come back to that. So thank you all for being here tonight. I really appreciate this, and I'm going to go back and look through the chat and just make sure that if there's anything, if you feel there's anything that's missed and you want to carry on this conversation, please make sure that you comment below. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed yourself here tonight, and I really look forward to seeing you next Thursday. Okay, stay well. Namaste, everybody. Namaste.